many of you consider yourselves natural storytellers? Probably not many, right? Pretty brave thing to say, that's me. What's the job with your submission and what's the job on the day you're presenting? Tell a story. Have a story. Storytelling is not from Hollywood. Where's storytelling come from? Where do you reckon the DNA of storytelling was? Who created storytelling? Caveman. Society, tribal, basic. Yeah, I mean, spot on. If you think about it, if you go back to sort of very, very basic tribal ancestry. I'm married to a Dutch woman. I came home one night and her mother was telling my son a story about the war in Holland during the Second War. And I was going to go in and say, you're scaring the hell out of my kid. What I then realised was that she was passing on a story. Fact, fiction, doesn't matter, not for me to judge. So the point being, if you thought the session for the next couple of hours is about what font to use on your PowerPoint slides, then I'm probably going to disappoint you. The essence of this program, and this is the cumulative piece, is how the heck you as a team articulate at the pub test. How do you articulate what you're thinking? Because the difference between a document and a presentation is only the people. It's really hard to make people sexy or compelling or interesting or engaging in a document. About as good as it gets as a CV, right? So the whole point about this is to put the heart and the soul and the people and the humanity behind the story. So that's really the angle I'm going to take with you today, and then the sessions this evening and tomorrow. So what I'm going to do is, you'll see a series of slides there. I'm going to move through the theory pretty quickly, but then what I want to do is get you to a planning tool, and I want to explain to you how to use that, and then the sessions today and this evening and tomorrow is going to be really like a tutorial. I'm presuming that most of you haven't done too much around your presentation, because right now sequentially you'll be concentrating on your submission document. The difference between your submission document comes first and then after that comes your presentation. They're different, the audience is different, and arguably the messages have got to be super consistent, connected, but they're different. The objective is different, if that makes sense. So I'm going to move pretty quickly. Just a couple of handling instructions to get the most out of me. I'll move fast. If I say something you don't understand, you're grown-ups, you're in the back end of this program. It's pretty bloody solid, the program. I have been involved in it for 5 years. I set up a similar program in Sydney back in 2007 in the engineering space. And what I do know is that the bad news for most of you folks is presenting's not going to be your main thing. Most of you will be really good native problem solvers. You'll have much bigger maths brain than I've got. So understand your own limitations, and if I can figure out how to run a business and I can figure my way around an Excel spreadsheet, you can become adequate at presenting. Some of you will be introverted, some will be extroverted, some will be verbal, some won't be. And I'll look as I can to, if you like, roll up or distill some of the stuff you've covered over the last dozen odd sessions. So interrupt. I'll fill out the 2 hours, no problem. I won't keep any longer than 2 hours. That's just out of respect for time. As a business principle, if you can get the message across in a meeting in 40 minutes instead of an hour, people will love you because you don't frig around and you save them 20 minutes. Every time someone greets me and says I'm busy, I just yawn. Everyone's busy. Everyone's doing 2 jobs. Got it. What are you busy doing? So my job is to help you cut through this pretty quickly so that you can actually start working on it together. And it's probably the very best single test of teamwork will be the presentation. They'll see whether you're actually a team by the way in which you work together. So that's by way of a kick-off. I thought what we would do... Okay, I thought what I'd do, you've got a series of, pardon me, I've got a series of these A3s. The reason I've given them for you is not to everyone to have one, but to share one. I want you to sort of work through these together. So this is your overall process, if you like. And I want to take a few minutes to go through this. How many of you at some point have actually stood in front of a client and done something by way of a sort of a formal pitch where you've been actually trying to win a piece of work? Cool. How many of you have had some sort of formal training in that space? Nice. One. It's not unusual, right? So if you're sitting there going, it's not me, it's you know. And frankly, if you want to do it, go and join a sports club, a footy club, a community organisation, and find yourself a role and stand up and scare the hell out of yourself frequently, and you'll get good at it. If that makes sense. If you want to do this, it's a pretty key executive skill. If you can't stand in front of a group and address them, whether it's a client or internal group or a board, forget leadership. It's the ability to lead and influence people and followership and all that stuff depends on your ability to be able to communicate a message. So if you want to do that, as I say, go and do Toastmasters, that's great, but go and join a sports club or somewhere and take on the role of a secretary, a treasurer, or a committee meeting member of maybe, say, Future Leaders next year, and just find a way where you make yourself uncomfortable, if that makes sense. Okay, so the broad process, I'm going to move through this pretty quickly. Make notes as you like. So the first starting point is knowing your audience. We have how many judges? 5? In this day and age, there's no secrets. LinkedIn, board reports. There's probably someone in this room that works with those people inside the organisation. This is a small village. It's 2 degrees of separation. People will know the judges. The extent to which you get off your rear end and go and find out about them and their preferences, their background, do they like lots of detail, little detail? So I'll step through those elements of if you like, of research. What sort of language are they used to? And find a way or a delivery method that's going to work for them. You've got 4 or 5 judges. How do you please all of them? Precisely. So they're not amorphous, they're not the judging panel, they're 4 individuals. So you just need to be able to give each of them something that they can process or relate to. And I have seen not the best bid get up because people have put it in language the judges can assess. Bear in mind a bit of empathy for the judges. They're part-time, they're senior folks. They will likely have read the document maybe the weekend prior. Some of the really good kids will have marked it up with some post-it notes and have some questions and some comments. Some people will have frankly read the document and forgotten. So to that extent, your challenge is to make it A, distinctive, B, to encapsulate the key messages, but not give them war and peace. So it's kind of a balancing act. So you need to know your audience. Secondly, objective. There's an objective for you, but there's an objective for the audience. Your objective is competitive, is about providing a pretty crisp synopsis. What do you reckon the objective is for the judge panel? What are they looking for? So you don't need to answer, but think about what's going to enable them to make a decision in your favour, if that makes sense. So put yourself in their shoes. Persuasion. You will hear people talk and make statements about stuff. Persuasion, the only persuasion is self-persuasion. I think it was Aristotle or Socrates that said that. If I walk up, let's say that this is a gun or a revolver, and I hold it up to Scott's head. Now, you might think that that's persuasive. However, he's got a couple of questions to ask himself. Is it real? Is it loaded? Does Ed know how to use a handgun? If in fact yes is the answer to all of those, if he in fact fires it, is there a chance it'll just graze my forehead and it's not going to be life-threatening? well, so am I. But the point being, you can't force anybody to do anything at all. Think about little Greta Thunberg or whatever her name is at the moment. Pretty persuasive. There are some people who sit there and go, she doesn't convince me. But there will be some people sit there and go, I am convinced. Now the message is not any different. It's how we hear the message. So the point about persuasion is what case studies, what statistics, what examples, what hypotheticals, what images am I going to use in our presentation to say, we're going to take Hunter and Newcastle from here to there, prove it to me. And how do I prove it? That makes sense. Then on to structure, we're going to spend, in a few minutes, we're going to step through structure. The point about structure is make it easy for yourself to deliver. It's really pretty complex if you've got 5 in a team. So we need to have a game plan to get through the message from head to tail without it looking clunky, mechanical, manipulative, slick, there's kind of a balance of objectives there. Visuals. I'm not going to spend any time on visuals of any note. I would actively, as a starting point, discourage you from using PowerPoint full stop, end of question. The audience are going to want to see this. They're going to want to see whether you folks know each other, like each other, believe in each other, believe in the principles. And invariably, as happens right now, where are you looking? You're looking at me. But I've given you a decision to make, haven't I? And you've got this document on your table. So I'm actually forcing you to make a choice. Me, there, or there, correct? So if you want to relate to and appeal to the audience, then make it easy for them to focus on you, because they want to understand the heart and soul behind this. It's not the merit of the business case at all. It's really about you as leaders. We'll talk a little about, I guess, a read-through. I would suggest, we'll go through this today and tomorrow, but I would suggest you set up a regime where you do a couple of rehearsals and then the whole interactive piece, how you address questions. There are generally about sort of 5 or 10 minutes worth of questions at the end of the presentation. In my experience, they, unlike business, they're probably not fatal in the context of this presentation. However, it will give a really good insight into how well you know and believe in your topic. Delivery. There's an old adage there, Morabian, and they talk about the words being only 7% of the impact. And something like the 93% is who you are and what you and how you articulate or deliver. So if you think about the words only being 7%, you probably should get those 7% right, but it's only 7%. It's how you interact as a team and the authenticity behind your presentation. And lastly, from a structural standpoint, do a recap. I'd have to say to you, again, in the context of business, doing a review and saying it's over it's only over when you say it's over. So if you're going to work and trying to win a piece of work with a client or run a session, it doesn't just stop there. There's something that comes after it. They do a debrief and then there's a next time. So to that extent, the review is really all about debriefing and then engagement with the client. So that's broadly the process head to tail. I'll take air for a second. I've moved through that pretty quickly. It's effectively going to form our agenda for the next hour and a bit. So we're going to step through the audience. We're going to then work on a persuasive business case and start going through the structuring program. Any questions or comments on anything that I've said so far? Okie doke. Alrighty. Might get you to grab hold of that, the handout that I've left on each, the yellowish ones. So I think Lindell would have gone through DISC with you, correct? Just hang with me a second. Did Lindell run the session on DISC, Baron? Okay, but most of you will understand what I'm talking about when I talk about psychometrics, yeah? Yeah, okay. All right. Sorry guys, just hang with me a sec. Okay, so this is kind of a simplified variation on DISC. I'm just going to talk you through it, you'll get the idea. So the whole idea here is plotting two dynamics. How dominant or how easygoing are individuals, how controlled or spontaneous they are. Just looking at two dynamics. The point about it being, if you think about the individual, just as DISC has its 4 quadrants, correct? It was DISC, correct? So you sit there and you go, okay, how do I relate to someone that's expressive? How do I relate to someone that's a driver or direct? And then how do I relate to someone that's analytic, and how do I relate to someone that's amiable? The chances are you'll have 4 people in the room, given the DNA of executives in this region, this city, you will find it a bit simplistic, but an awful lot of them have got what I'd call a technical background. They're invariably operations, engineering, a bit simplistic, possibly science, process engineering. So they've got they've got a really bloody good maths brain, by and large. Generalisation, but you don't tend to have too many marketing ad type people. You have HR folks, but that's kind of as a generalisation. So these people would generally be sitting down here in that analytical space. The point about all of this is, do your research into the people, look at their backgrounds, their base uni degree will probably give you a pretty good insight. Look at the nature of the business, and then think about what is a standard by which that firm would either have presentations internally, or how would they actually present or be presented to if you're a supplier. And if you stop and think about it, how much information do I give them? A lot or a little? Do I use facts or do I use sort of expressive hyperbole? So think about, consider that, and as I say, you might find that you wind up with a judge over here, one over there, one over there, one over there. My guess, you'll wind up with probably largely over those two right. So driver, analytical, decision-making sort of folks like that. Tim or Jude, off the top of your head, do you know who the judges are? I'm not across them, I apologise. That's all right. Is it? Okay. Yeah, okay, well neither Kyle nor Tony disagree with what I just said there. And I've spent enough time around Kari and she's probably pretty similar. So my point is, you don't have a lot of time either, so get to it, explain your proposition and then give them some substantiation. That's kind of the executive summary of that. Do you get why we actually stop and concentrate on the decision makers? Does that make sense? Right. Quick questions or comments, otherwise I'm just going to keep moving. Okay. This you may not have seen before. If you think about the styles of people, then think about how people make decisions or how they value something. So I'd worked in sales and marketing industrially for about 15 years and I saw this and kind of in my own simple head it made some really good sense. For a moment, forget business and just think about why you live in the postcode you do, why you drive the sort of car you do, and why you spend the amount of money on a watch that you do or don't. Just think about simple things like that. If you think about it, we make decisions based on a number of criteria. One is rational. So that's logic-based object decision-making. So that's things like the size, the price, the colour, the timing, the availability, the proximity, all those sorts of things. We then move across and you'll see that we talk about the emotional drivers. So if they're matters of the head, the emotional drivers are matters of the heart. So things like, dislike, trust, fear, greed, ego, ambition, all those sorts of things. So if they're the logical ones, these are the emotional. The third one, pardon me, is the political or the perceptions. And they're the ones that, for good reason, we actually tend not to talk about, but they're real. People are bigoted about you because of your age, your religion, your colour, your gender, whether you do or don't have kids, are or not a family person, LGBTI, the whole pick, right? That stuff, whilst it's toxic, is absolutely alive and well. So people will either take you on board to do something because of what they perceive as your background, your amount of experience, your youth, where you're educated. And so these are, as I say, religion, politics, country of origin, race, who your company's connected with, the right suburb. I mean, all of these things are prejudices, correct? But people make decisions based on prejudice. Correct? Like it, don't like it. I'm not here to tell you that that's right or wrong. So if you think about it, everyone understands what an EOI or an RFT is? Like an expression of interest or a request for tender? That stuff's in the document. And the idea is to make the playing field level. The playing field is never level. That's what I try to do, make the playing field level. Over here, you go and say to someone, and I've had this happen with government agencies in Sydney, and they say, look, we really don't want that person. What they really mean is the ideal person, this is secondment consultants, the ideal person is female, is sub 30 and is blonde. True. So imagine the mistake somebody made when they turned up with a mid-40s Malaysian Muslim male. 2019, true story. So my point being, if you, and that's the ugly side of it, right? But if you think about an organisation where you've done lots of work over time, you kind of get into a positive groove, if that makes sense, about understanding the client and being able to address a whole bunch of issues. Some of it's that, but some of it is you kind of look like you belong there. Does that make sense? So again, when you're diving into understanding the audiences, the judges on the night, then it's really about understanding what they might be looking for across there. So I mean, use Kyle Loades as an example. He's achieved a hell of a lot for a man of his age. He really has. Is he likely to be sort of jingoistically motivated by Newcastle? Probably not. But something that's a bloody great idea that you've thought about that actually has this city in this region sit up above the parapet and something to be really proud of is probably likely to appeal. So just try as hard as you can to put yourself in the shoes of the judges, and you'll find that the answers mostly are there. So the point about all of this, there's lots of examples, but if you just wound up, and one of the things in the next sessions that I'll be with you, is what are the one or two or three rational things that you're trying to address with your solution? What are the couple of emotional things you're trying to address? And what are a couple of the things you're trying to address politically? Okay? Then, so if that's what we're trying to address, then let's make those messages nice and clear. Okay, I'm going to pause there because we'll go into structure in a second. So if you go back to that process, the 9 steps I talked about, time about the style of the audience, who have I got in the room, what do we know about them? So effectively build a back of the envelope bio on each of the judges. What are they, what is their interest pertinent to your, if you've got something that relates to the resource industry and they're a professional services operator from Sydney that works in law that has nothing to do with resources, you probably better think that one through, because you can use resource analogies or mining analogies and it's not going to mean anything to them. Does that make sense? So if you dig into that, you've got to figure out how to translate it into their language. Okay? Any questions? Okay? Alrighty, let me, sorry guys, I'm a document behind. You've got these in there. I'll leave these with you because they'll be handy for you when we do the planning later today and tomorrow. So the idea here is these boxes look pretty complex, but what I'm going to do is just step you through what goes in the boxes. And I'll give you a description. What I would encourage you to do is if you've got that document in front of you, make a couple of notes as we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is explain the boxes. Then I'm going to explain to you the way you deliver it. And then I'm going to explain to you the way you write it. Just like a letter or a report, you don't start at the beginning. You arguably start with the end in mind. Does that make sense? So that's exactly the principle we're going to use. So opening comments, the first 15 or 20 seconds, people are tuning into not what you say, but how. Do you look like you want to be there? Are you prepared? Are you excited? Do you look like a team? So for the first 15 or 30 seconds, you don't want to deliver the crown jewels because they just aren't listening. Think about, there's a million impressions going on, right? And they've just seen 3 other presentations before you if you happen to be 4th. So there's a lot going on. So as you walk in there, you probably want to give them a 15 or a 30-second piece to settle and concentrate. Arguably why I used that video clip to create a cut or a shift between what Jude was talking about and myself. So that's opening comments. The next is a creative. My clip was the creative, right? And I said to you, why did I show that? Because we're going to talk about storytelling. It's not that hard, is it? You don't have to, and you hear people say, I'm trying to think of a great way to start my presentation. You don't need to. It's actually the last thing we decide. And if you get the rest of the business message together, you'll be sitting there on a Thursday night at 9 p.m. watching a dumb ad on TV and you'll go, that's it. because you've got the rest of the business message together, if that makes sense. So it's optional. We then articulate the subject or the topic. What is it that we're there to do for them? Not for us, for them. So people stand up and say, oh, we want to show you today why we're the best people. Fan-bloody-tastic. As opposed to, what we thought we'd do today is explain to you what each of you might take away from our proposition or something, but couch it in their language. Agendas 1, Agenda 2 and Agenda 3. That's kind of the strategy piece behind a presentation. What do I cover first? What do I cover second? And what do I cover third? We then dive down and we've got the detail under 1, the detail under 2, the detail under 3. Because if a presentation's 30 minutes and you've got 3 sections, by the time you get to there, they've completely forgotten what happened there. So part of it is making it memorable so they can make a decision, and the more memorable it is, the chances of them acting upon it and being able to make a decision when they're sitting there an hour later, having seen 4 hours of presentations, because they're the numbers, had Q&A, and they've bloody forgotten what you were about. Happens all the time. And, I understand, you've got criteria, yada, yada, yada. It's not always the best term that gets up. It's not the way it works. So you've got to be memorable. So then you also do a quick synopsis at the back end of each of those 3 sections, and then you talk about the conclusion, the next steps, or whatever it might be. So that's, I ran, and it's 20 years ago now because they're just demolishing it. I ran the stadium bid for Multiplex 20 years ago for the Olympic Stadium. And we wrote a 10,000 page submission based on that. So the principles behind that are really, really robust. So you kind of have a beginning. So that's all the setup and the agenda. That's the middle. And then that's the end. So let me show you how it flows. So as I said before, you start with, you write, the numbers are your writing plan. So the first thing you do is try to couch your subject to your topic. Today what we'd like to do is blah. End in mind, so what's our conclusion? And if you then have those 2 defined, then how do we want to slice the session up? How do we want to segment it? I'll give you some examples in a minute. And then what's section 4, substance under Agenda 1, substance under Agenda 2 and Agenda 3. The beauty of that is you can just bullet point that, and if you get hijacked for time, which often happens, you can sit there and go, that's still the topic, I can get rid of 2 or 3 of those elements that are not crucial. And then a quick synopsis, and then up to your opening comments, and as I said before, your creative is optional. It's the last thing to do. So that's broadly the writing process. So when in a minute or in a half an hour, I'm actually going to give you some time this evening right now to do this, but I'm going to get you to start taking a crack at that. If you think about the starting point, what would that be? Because what this will do is pretty quickly identify you haven't really thought about your audience, and it'll have you go, you know what, we'll get on and stalk these folks on LinkedIn or web or whatever it might be. But that's broadly the writing process. And sorry guys, so in terms of, I think the doco you've got, no it does not, okay, stand corrected. So let me put some arrows, if you would, just put the arrows in as my finger goes, because this is not a felt board. So the delivery sequence, so we've talked about the numbers being the writing sequence. The delivery sequence is you start with the opening comments. If you've got a creative, that's next. Then the subject. You then come down and you signpost your Agenda 1, your Agenda 2, your Agenda 3. You then come down and you dive into Body 1. You then go from there to Body 2, you go to Body 3. You then come down and you work through Summary 1, 2, 3 and Conclusion. So really what you're doing is they're the signposts, they're the bulk of the presentation, they're your summaries and they're your conclusion. Sorry about the flow. Is that clear? Okay. What I reckon I'm going to do, what have we got? 5:45. I might just touch on persuasion, and then what I'm going to get you to do is take a crack at drafting an outline of your own presentation. Not to share with others, obviously, but a quick critique around table. Are we likely to have any mentors join us? That's okay, that's all right. If that was the case, I'd have them work with you. So let me just explain the persuasion piece, because what you'll tend to find that the key determinants here are, do you have a structure that is a nice, easy to follow structure, and is it persuasive? That's kind of all that really matters from the test standpoint. So features, it's a factual description or a characteristic about your offer, your proposition. Most likely should be unique. One of the problems this day and age is there's just way too much information for everybody. So your ability to skinny the information, distill the information is pretty critical. And then lastly, it needs to be tangible. If any of you have ever heard the term WIFM, what is in it for me, or what does that mean to the customer? So the benefit is, what does that feature mean to the customer? Keep these features relatively few. Don't talk about, I listened to a presentation from Amazon only probably 3 months ago. Two days in a row, we had Amazon one day, Google the following. And they articulated Jeff Bezos's keys to success. How many do you reckon? 14. I can't remember 14. The Google guys came in the following day and they are just dead set weird. They talk about being Googleites and all that sort of jazz. But what was really evident was the culture. It wasn't that they had a mantra that Jeff Bezos had laid down. They had a culture that was really bloody tangible. Just as when you walk in to the judges on the day, you will either look like you want to be there or look like you don't want to be there. And it's game face, right? You'll be buggered, you'll be tired. But you need to walk in there looking like you're going to ace this. And none of you actors or actresses, right? So that's a little bit of the motivational piece for you. So the point about this is, pick a couple of relatively unique attributes, and I'll help you distill those over the next session. So what does that mean to the customer? But in this case, the customer is whom? The judge, correct? So the customer is the judge. So if you've got Kyle Loade sitting there, you may well say, you may use his name, you may not. You might say, so really what that's all about is blah, but something that relates to them. Does that make sense? People look for benefits and make decisions on time, 3 elements: time, money, and ego. So if you think about, we talked before about the rational, the emotional and political. Rational is time and money, correct? If you think about ego in its broadest sense, how does that make me feel? Do I feel better about myself? Do I feel comfortable? Do I feel threatened? Do I feel happy? So if you think about it, people look to have something create a proposition that is either around making or creating time, saving or creating time for them, making or saving money for them, or making them feel better about themselves in really simple terms. And a lot of your proposition will be emotional and political, which will be about making people feel better about themselves. So evidence, I rolled some of these off previously. I don't know how many legally qualified folk we've got in the room, but it's almost a legal definition of evidence. So it's anything that supports your case. Any of you ever been interrogated in a witness stand? They'll often use professional witnesses. And because of their credential, they may interpret a set of circumstances and go, well, that certainly is A, which they know to be an absolute lie. But they're a professional witness. So what will be in play there is their professional credential. Whether it's true or not is not the point, but it's admitted as evidence. Does that make sense? Lies, damn lies, and statistics. So the sorts of things you might want to think about. So what's a case study? What is your proposition going to do in terms of transforming what goes on in the Hunter in Newcastle, as an example? A testimonial. You might put up a bogus quote from the mayor of, the mayor of Newcastle. Institutional. What is it that the Australian Minerals Council would say about your proposition, as an example? What would the state government say? It might be an expert, a third party. It could be a visual. It could be a set of statistics. Imagine what GDP would look like out of this region in 10 years' time under the assumption of our business model or whatever it might be. So if you think about all of the case studies, all of the stats, that's a lot of information. The job for you is to simplify it. So what's the right amount of the right type of information? So right amount and the right type of evidence. I'm mathematically not that clever. So statistics give me the shits, because I think you can prove absolutely bloody anything you want with statistics, and I'm not that smart. So if you want to give me the irrits, give me statistics. Conversely, if you want to convince me of someone, find out who I respect in that space. Might be economics, might be maths, might be motoring, doesn't matter. And then find someone that I respect. That's the way you convince me. But that's not necessarily going to be you folks. Some of you folks will sit and go, I've got to have good, hard data. That's cool. It's just not me. And if I'm a decision maker, then that's a problem. You need to tailor to decision makers. Everyone's basis for making decisions is different. Just because you believe it doesn't mean others will. You should start at the opposite proposition. And some people need more information, some people need less. So the summary on persuasion is understand your audience, understand the type of, if you like, evidence that's going to convince them, and then give it to them. You're in trouble if your presentation doesn't contain persuasive evidence, whether it's a combination of statistics, visuals, images, and so forth. Does that make sense? I reckon that is pretty much it. So what we're going to do is we're going to dive back to this. What I'm going to suggest is, I'll just grab one of these. What I'd like you to do is just reverse one of these, and then as a table for probably about 15 minutes, just take a crack at getting through stages 1, 2, and 3. All right? So a dozen words or a half dozen words that describe your purpose or your objective in the presentation. Secondly, how do you want to articulate your conclusion? These are only probably a maximum a dozen words. But then the strategy piece is, what do we want to cover first, what do we want to cover second, what do we want to cover third? A couple of examples. In fact, I'll give you a quick presentation just using this. So I'll give you a presentation on me personally, and I'll show you how this works. Thank you. I'm going to talk about, I'll talk to you about my two sons. First thing I'm going to do is talk to you about my two sons, similarities and differences. Nice, simple agenda, right? Similarities, differences. So I've got two boys, one's 30, left school in year 10, professional surfer, travelled the world, been to 40 countries, did really, really well. Now runs his own business, lives in Byron Bay, and is the father of our first grandchild. My other son, and I have two, lives in London, 28 years old, works in digital marketing for American Express, about to come home for Christmas, been away for 2 years, and is bringing home a lovely German girl. So two boys, very, very different. So similarities, differences. Similarities. Both pretty soft, genuine sorts of guys. Both blokes that I think are very different, but I'm proud of the way they sort of think about society, and particularly women. I work in the infrastructure space and it's pretty brutal. I've got a very strong alpha female wife. So there's a lot of common similarities with them. Differences. One is the Viking, my wife's Dutch, so one is the Viking, he's 6'3", the surfer, surprisingly. And the other one's about 5'7" or 5'8". The Viking is incredibly short on confidence. And the short guy's just got all the confidence to burn in the world. So lots of common similarities and some substantive differences. So, two boys, same parents, similarities, but both the way they were raised, and they've got good regard for each other. And the last one is differences, certainly physically, and the way their whole self-esteem piece is quite different. So conclusions and next steps, maybe one day you'll meet my sons. My point being that it's a pretty simple canvas. These are literally almost words or signposts, does that make sense? This doesn't need to be substantive, but it does mean the beginning, the middle, and the end. Make it easy for them over 30 minutes. By the time you get down here, they have forgotten the bulk of this. So it's really a matter of then, it's also handy for you to slice up responsibilities on the presentation, because these don't have to be individual. You might decide this last portion here might be a conversation that 3 people to contribute to. Okay? And you might have someone do the opening, someone do the following. You may ask the question, I'll anticipate and answer it now. You might say, does everyone have to present? I do remember this course, something like this about 1998, and I was talking about Germans and Dutch, and they had this business, and there was this very, very strong German woman, and she stood up with a very thick German English accent, and she presented for 20 minutes. And the other 4 people in the team just sat there and watched. Didn't look right. So, yeah, I really encourage every one of you to find a way to participate in the presentation. And that's a bit of there's a bit of stage management on that. But that's the way it works. Quick questions now that I've given you a quick demonstration. Last thing, a couple of typical agendas that might make sense. Our concept, key risks and opportunities, impact for Newcastle on the Hunter, maybe. History, current, future. Just really simple storytelling evolutions. Our interpretation of the brief. Key elements and what's a good way to think about it? Yeah, key outputs. Stages to implementation. So there's lots of ways of telling a chronology, if you like. I think that's probably it for the moment. Questions on anything that I've covered so far? Or comments? Okay, why don't I let you then get on to do what I suggested, which is take a stab at 1, 2, and 3. Do it as a team, work on one piece of paper, and take 15 minutes. And then what I'll do is I'll actually just work around and get you to explain it to me, and then we'll move on to the next piece. I made a comment to a couple of you. Thinks about the way you choreograph yourself, because there's 5 of you, some of you got 6. You don't need to stand. If you think about the timing, you've got a max, by the time you've got interactive, you've got a max of 30 minutes. It ain't long. And for those of you that have spent time doing it, if you talk rubbish, the time will go really, really quickly, and it will come across like a car crash. If you might have heard the old principle of, the more you the more practice, the easier it gets, the more, as a result of the more practice you do. So I'd encourage you, even if you're standing in the shower, talking through whatever it is you say. You'll never get it identical time over. All you're trying to do is write a story into your head. That's all you're trying to do. All of you will learn differently. Some of you will need longhand notes to learn. Other people will look at 3 bullet points and go, got it. And I've seen people stand up and look at 3 bullet points, and it might as well be Swahili, because when you stand up, something happens between this and this, right? So certainly the rehearsal piece is pretty critical. I thought the last thing I might spend probably 5-10 minutes on is delivery. So this is all about content, information, right? So what I want to do is just step you through reasonably swiftly some base elements around the delivery. So you see that I stand and I talk using these things. Right, so I'll spend a few minutes talking about gestures. I'll spend a bit of time talking about that. Spend a bit of time talking about voice. So if you think about it right now, I've got 20 sets of eyes or 30 sets of eyes on me. If I spend half my time looking out there or down here, my ability to engage you is cut in half, right? I've got the numbers are not in my favour; they're in your favour. So I've got to work pretty actively to engage you with my eyes. So if you're you've only got 4 judges on the day, 4 or 5 judges on the day. So you're either doing one of 2 things. You're looking at one of the judges, or you're possibly looking at your colleague. That's okay. And if you're one of the colleagues, you're doing one of 3 things. You're looking at your colleague, you're looking at one of the judges, or you're taking some notes that are pertinent. Taking notes is fine. Just think about where your bias of eye contact is, because that's, L. Ron Hubbard talked about windows being the eyes to the soul and all that sort of jazz. The fact is, if you're looking at people, the engagement goes up significantly. Does that all make sense? Most of you would have had generally a dad or a mum would say, look me in the eye when you're talking to me. There's a good reason for it. So I guess the point about that is use eye contact, lots of it, because what it does is it connects, but it also shows, whether it's conviction or belief, whatever. I guess the second is this. There's about 5 elements to your voice. So there is the speed at which you speak, first one. So the term I use is gait. You've got a regular rate at which you speak. So there's the speed with which you speak, but then there's the variability with which you speak. So if I'm going to move through something pretty quickly because it's pretty routine. So for most of you, we talked about the first piece of the presentation probably being more brief, correct? And then you sit there and you go, well, except for the special team, who are going to take 40 minutes on their first section. It's a joke. So the idea being, if you're going to move through something and say, hey, look, I'm going to give you a quick synopsis, then you can probably afford to move through that pretty quickly. But if you then say, I'd really like you to think about something, then slow up and put a pause in it. So they talk about your average speed and then the way in which you shift speed. Second one is pauses. Right? What happens when I pause? Correct? Attention. It enables me to think. It also enables you to think on what I've just said. So there are going to be logical points throughout your presentation where a pause makes really good sense. So if theoretically you were using an image or a graphic or a clip, you might at the end of that just stop. And you'll never stop for more than maybe a couple of seconds. But if you force a pause into the presentation, it changes the impact. Also enables you, if you're nervous or you've lost your way, enables you to pick that up. So we've talked about pace and we've talked about pause. The third is pitch. Pitch is the music in your voice, the rise and fall. You hear people referred to as being monotone. I lived in Asia for 5 years, and expressing myself to folks with English as a second language was a large part of my job. Not because they were idiots at all, they were all bilingual, but it was me making my accent understood. So what you will find is if you keep talking like this at that tone, and you all seem like that, and you're the third or the fourth team presenting, they'll be gone. So part of it goes to how much you rise or how much you fall, and then in combination. So if the pitch rise and fall, and a dramatic example of pitch is I guess operatics. Certainly, generally morning for some reason, morning radio people. So there's lots of rise and down, and it's all over the shop. Now that's not common business language. You don't go in and go, "Hey, boss, how you doing?" You don't do that for a bloody good reason. And I'm not suggesting you do that on the day. However, making yourself engaging and also making it sound like you give a toss about what you've busted your ass for the last couple of months on is pretty important. So pitch is more and more difficult. We've talked about pace, we've talked about pitch, we've talked about pause. We haven't talked about volume. Most people tend to equate loud levels of volume with aggression. On the flip side, most people tend to associate low levels of volume with weakness. Not true. But think about, again, the variation. So what's your average level of volume? So if I've got, say, you are the 5 judges and I'm here, if I spoke to you like this for the next half hour, you go, like I'm not deaf. Conversely, if I spoke like this, you kind of start giving up, don't you? I happen to have, because I surfed a lot when I was younger, I've got really bad hearing, rubbish hearing. And so when people don't talk, I just go, I give up. Because most people don't want to be rude. They don't want to say, hey, could you talk up? I can't hear you. So they won't give you that signal. So there's again, variety of volume. If you were to start more quietly to establish a sort of level of comfort with the audience, and then towards the end of it, you might sit and say, so really, because volume does associate with confidence, And you might finish, if there's somebody finishing, they might say, so look, it's been really great spending time with you today. Here's what we think, if that makes sense. So the variety of volume. And I'd have to say, what do we say? Pace, pause, pitch, volume. That's pretty much it. Okay, last two pieces are what we call gestures and movement. So think about this not as yourself, but as a team. Because the layout, Mez, where are the presentations being run? Yep. In this room. Beautiful. So, from memory, you'd have judges. Yep. Yep. Okay, a couple of things. Think about the difference between this and this, if you're the judges. That intimacy between there, I mean, yeah, this is kind of into your space, yeah? So you sit there, I'm not suggesting you want to do that, but also huddling down here, you kind of like, so it's your theatre, it's your space. You've got time to set the room up. So think about how you do that to engage the audience. The sequencing will come out after the documents go in, Mez? Yep. Okay, cool. So I think I've mentioned that to most of you. So again, you can sit there and it's like a job interview. Most people here have interviewed other people to work for jobs, yeah? And you sit there and you go, if you've got a few of them, it's really often very bloody hard to remember the first person. And there's kind of this grey zone in the middle, and you generally will just about always be able to remember the last. The fact is, you're going to get dealt the cards you're going to get dealt. The point being, if you are at the beginning, shape the ground. The one thing you've got is you set the precedent. Does that make sense? Because no one's gone before you. So the extent to which you have a go, and with any of these things, if you're going to do something speculative, don't make it speculative. Go hard or go home. If you come up with an idea, go hard at it. Don't sort of say, oh, we're not too sure if it's going to work. Well, don't bloody do it. If you think you've got an idea, then put the foot down and go home. So to that extent, what you'll find is and I'm not suggesting you become thespians in a hurry, but just think about whether you stand, whether you sit. Whether you decide that you want to come up and draw a bit of proximity, you might decide you want to bring another table up and put it in front of the judges. You might decide you're not going to use anything on the screen. So there's a whole bunch in play that is at your disposal. There are not really many rules. All the rules are, if you're going to have a slide thing, bring it on a USB so the bloody thing can be loaded up. I'd encourage you to keep your visuals simple. Most of these folks will want to see the whites of your eyes and see what sort of humans you are. With respect, they don't want to see a bunch of this junk. I can tell you that for fact. People that have got a technology business, is there someone here from BI? Right. So if I was sitting there talking to any of you and your colleagues, you sit there and go, you kind of live in that world. So it's almost like if I didn't have, you'd sit there and go, interesting. Right? So it's understand the operating environment. And I guess the other side of it is, I remember years ago I was dealing with a Italian guy, and he stood up to present and he went like this. And I said, what's doing with the hands? He said, what do you mean? I said, where are you from? He said, I'm Italian. And I said, whereabouts? And he said, from Roma. Oh, that's cool. I said, what happened to your hands? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, I've never met an Italian that doesn't speak with their hands. He said, I went and I did a presentation course 10 years ago. I was working for ABB, right? Sibra Maveri. He said it was called the Gustav Kaiser method. I said, would have been a German. He said, absolutely. So it was very Teutonic. And what the guy said is, what are you doing with your hands? You put them behind your back. And it locked him up. So it constrained him, because that was not the natural way for him to express, if that makes sense. The point about this is, and again, wherever you are, the more relaxed, intuitive, natural you look like you feel about your topic, the more persuasive that will be. Does that make sense? So you don't, first, second, third, there's some really obvious stuff. Up there, down here, they're really just kind of natural gestures. The point being, if you feel like you want to have a go with them, have a go. Because what's going on is you've got these four poor bloody judges that have sat there. Don't wear jackets. Tip for you. Do not wear a jacket, and if you're wearing a jacket, don't walk in with the bloody thing buttoned up. Look like a trussed-up turkey, right? In terms of what you wear what you would wear in that setting in day-to-day business. You don't need to wear a bloody $1,000 suit if you never wear a suit, because you won't look like you belong in a suit, right? So to that extent, just try to do it authentically as you can. So as I say, certainly lots of eye contact, certainly use volume. Yeah, exactly. What do I do with these things now? Certainly volume that makes it easy for you to be heard, but also doesn't yell at people. And then lastly, use the room. And perhaps the last thing I'd leave you with is there's an old adage of I'll get it right in a minute. There's two principles. One is don't walk on your lines. If I start talking about an idea and start wandering over here, all of a sudden your ability to listen to what I'm saying is challenged by the fact, where the hell's he going? Right? So don't give people confusing signals. You're going to make a point, make the point, make it once, make it well, and I might move over here and then talk about this, because that changes the entire dynamic, doesn't it? Proximity for you guys if I'm here, as opposed to over here. And if you're one of 4 judges and the team skews over here because the lectern's here, then the person that's where Ben is probably not really likely to feel much love, if that makes sense. Look, I reckon that's it. The one thing we haven't talked about is questions. There's a very simple principle which I can send to you, but it's so bloody simple. There's 5 C's. Just write 5 C's down vertically. If you want to answer a question really, really well, the first C is clarify the question. The second C is put it in context. Let them know that you understand why they asked the question and how it relates to the topic. The third is communicate an answer the question. The fourth is use a case study, give them an example. And the fifth C is check that you've answered the question. So the first one is clarify, feed it back to them. Most people misinterpret the question. So clarify the question, put it in context, communicate, give them a case study or an example, and then check that you've answered the question. You'll probably get maybe 2-3 questions at most. Most of the judges will feel like they both want to and should ask a question, so be prepared for questions. Unless it's really obvious, have someone that interprets the question and either directs it. Unless it's, if I say to Kane, hey Kane, what do you reckon about this? It's not for anybody else to say, oh, Kane's not really able to answer that. I will. You go, no, shut up, give Kane half a go. Conversely, have someone choreograph the questions. Probably happy to take any questions any of you have got, but the nature of it is that the next sessions are really about helping you flesh out the detail, roles, responsibilities and timing. Any quick questions now? I'm happy to take. All good.